Team 1. Breach, breach, breach.
You're listening to Breach Your Mind. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I appreciate you guys all being here. I don't know if you can tell from the camera or not, but got a little more facial hair than normal. I'm actually a little proud of it. A little more gray showing. I've been on vacation for, I guess the last couple of days, last 7 days or so. And took vacation from shaving as well. So that was kind of a nice little treat to myself. And I guess since today, this evening is the last day of my vacation and I, go back to work, get back to the normal life tomorrow. It's only fitting that we kind of jump into this now. So the last show, you guys may remember that we wound up discussing traumatic grief. I kind of give you some examples from my life and what I went through, and we talked about that a little bit. Well, after the show went live, I had someone reach out to me and they wanted to discuss depression derived from grief. So I told them we could, I promised this person that we would still talk face to face, but it kind of felt like this was something that was worth sharing as well here. So in first understanding all of this, and I hate that I have to keep prefacing this, but with the world we live in today, I mean, it's kind of where we are now. So I am not a clinical psychologist, clinical psychiatrist, licensed therapist. I'm none of that. I'm an average guy every day. I've done some things. I've done some school, got a little education under my belt and some life under my belt. So, kind of know a few things, some things that work, some things that haven't worked. Not to mention my job, I kind of get on a regular basis with that. I get a little more exposure to it than I guess the average person would. So that's where all of my knowledge comes from. Yes, I do have a little bit of education in it, but it's more experience and knowledge based off of that, as well as, a continuing education on that just in my own time. Excuse me. So just to kind of get that out of the way. So, I don't want anybody thinking, oh, well, this is what he said, so what I'm saying is what Brian's saying. So hopefully anything that I say stemming from this is something that can help people. But as always, please don't look at this as my word as the final word on any of that. I hope nobody would think that. But if you're going through something, reach out to someone who's licensed in it, somebody who's certified in it, whether it's a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a therapist, anyone like that. Now, even if you're, if you want to reach out to someone in your church, that's fine too. Talking to me here, listen to what I got to say is no different than talking to a friend, hopefully. So with that out of the way, let's understand the difference in what grief is and what depression is, and the difference between traumatic grief and depression derived from grief. So grief is generally the loss of someone or something you have a bond with. Most commonly it's used with the loss of a loved one. When you have a loved one that dies, you're sad over it, obviously. And then a little grieving period after that. And I say little, that's relative to you. But a grieving period where you're going through that sadness. And that's grief. It causes you sadness. It doesn't affect your everyday life in the sense of you can still eat, you can still sleep, you can still go and do things. You still have moments that you're able to enjoy. You may even still participate in things that you enjoyed before your loss. But when you get to thinking about it, it makes you sad. So that's grief. Depression is a clinical term. It gets thrown around a lot, but it is technically a clinical term. Those in the mental health profession, even in the medical field, they use what's called the DSM. They're on the 5th version of it now. And every time it changes versions, a lot of these mental health disorders, mental health issues, things like that, they will undergo some changes. It may be a change in name. It may be a change in the pathology of it. It may be a change in, the criteria that it takes to meet those things. So depression is on there. We use depression to kind of lump all of the different depressive disorders into one, as far as what I'm speaking of. But I believe in what the individual was talking to me about falls more in the category of major depressive disorder, I think is what it's called. So depression is clinical. In order for you to truly be depressed, you need a diagnosis for it. And you can only get that through someone who's, certified, licensed, whatever, to do that. And in order for you to meet the criteria to be clinically depressed, there's, several different criteria you have to present, so many out of the entire list that you have to present in order to clinically qualify to be depressed, or to be suffering from a depressive disorder. But the big distinction between depression and grief, or depression and sadness, is the longevity of it, the longevity and the effect that it has on your everyday life. Depressive disorders, I believe, if I remember correctly, the criteria that make up the depressive disorder have to be present for, I believe, a minimum of 2 weeks. And in that, there's loss of appetite, loss of sleep, or sleep disturbances, loss of, interest in things that once did interest you. You're not able to get, joy out of anything or happiness out of anything. There's a lot that goes along with it. Depression can also include sadness. So yes, sadness can be an effect of, or a symptom of depression. But that being said, depression is not necessarily, just sadness. Just because you're sad doesn't mean you're depressed. But if you are sad, you could be depressed. So it's kind of flip-floppy back and forth, but there is a big distinction between the two. So, kind of keep that in mind as we move along talking about this, and in your own thinking about what you may be going through, or what a friend or family member may be going through, or a coworker. Is it something that's, momentary? Is it something that's sadness or grief? Or, maybe it's actually clinical depression. There's plenty of people with clinical depression that walk around every day and, they've got no diagnosis of it and they're just trying to do life. Some manage it and come through, some don't, not without help. And typically everybody at some point is going to experience sadness. You're going to experience grief. I wish that weren't the case. In my personal situation, one I'll share here on this show. I was actually, I ain't gonna say glad, but I was I can't think of a good word for it. So I wasn't glad, it was grief. I was accepting of the presence of grief in my life at the time. So that's the difference. That's the difference between depression and grief. Now, the person specifically asked about depression stemming from grief. Like we said, grief comes from typically the loss of something that you had a bond with. Again, family member, loved one, best friend, anything that you wind up forming that bond with that you lose causes you grief. Okay. So what they were asking was how to deal with depression that stems from it, meaning it started out as grief. It started out as sadness and grief, and progressively nothing changed and it morphed into depression. Now, I don't know if this individual has been clinically diagnosed, so I won't make that assumption that they have or have not. But at least in terms of what was shared with me, this person, feels like they are depressed, and he or she may be. I'm not that doctor. I'm not the one that can make that diagnosis, but they believe that they are depressed, and they believe they're depressed stemming from my assumption, a event in their life that caused them grief. Okay. The problem when you have something like that is it means that you never pulled out of it. Okay. They were in this downward spiral and just never were able to pull themselves out of it. Something in life prevented them from being able to get back to normal, or the new normal, as I said in the last show. So they just continued to spiral down until they got to, if you want to call it a new normal there, it was a new normal, but it was, down at the bottom. It was the lowest of lows. It's all the time feeling sad, all the time feeling lonely, all the time feeling hopeless. Was it this person's resiliency that prevented them from being able to do it? Were there other outside factors that caused them to not do it, or not pull out of it? Trouble at home, trouble at work, financial issues, secular issues, religious issues. Any of these things can, wind up causing more obstacles to prevent someone from being able to bring themselves back up, fall down and get back up. And that doesn't mean that they can't get back up. It just means that there were things that happened. The best way I think you could probably describe it would be, just constantly feeling like the other shoe's constantly falling. It's one thing after another. It's never ending. First you lose this person that you care about, and a week or two later something else happens, and a month later something else happens, and a week after that something else happens. The loss of a relationship, the loss of a job, any number of different things that just keep piling up on top of this person and making it harder and harder for them to stand up and get back on their feet again. And then it slowly morphs into, clinical depression, if that's what we're actually talking about. So the best example I can give, obviously, the last show we talked about traumatic grief and what I went through with the loss of my mom. It was traumatic to me. It was grief. To me, when I was preparing for this show, I went and looked at the diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder. I think I probably fit into it. But that's about as good as looking up your symptoms online, on WebMD and Googling your symptoms. And next thing you know, your cough is turned into lung cancer, and what it is honestly just a chest cold. So it really doesn't mean a whole lot that I read it and believe I fell into that category. But the doctor I saw didn't believe that I was depressed, just believed I was grieving. And I am more inclined to believe the doctor was right, because like I said in that last show, once I got some medication to help me sleep, I was actually able to start grieving properly and managing my feelings and my emotions. And, that was my case. But another time when I did experience grief would have been the loss of my dad. I don't remember if I've talked about it before, but I lost my dad to cancer. My dad developed lung cancer They saw a spot on his lung, decided not to do anything about it at the time. I have my own theories on why, but they decided not to do anything about it at the time. They weren't sure if it was scar tissue from him being an iron worker and being around all of that stuff, or what it was. So they decided to watch it. And 2 years after that, they noticed that, this spot was growing, and they decided to do a biopsy on it. And turns out it was lung cancer. And of course, my dad fought it. I believe I told y'all last show, my dad promised me he was going to do everything he could to fight it. And he did. He went through chemo and radiation, and I watched him dwindle away from the man that I grew up knowing to this, small, frail individual that was still fighting. And for the most part, he was still had the same mind. But slowly it just got to the point where Daddy was losing the battle. The cancer was spreading too fast. They weren't able to get it all, and all the treatments were just killing him. He was fighting it as hard as he could. We were doing everything we could to fight off all the symptoms from the radiation and the chemo, but it was a lot. It was a lot on him, and it was tough to watch him go through it. So when Daddy made the decision that he was done treating it with radiation and chemo, he wasn't done fighting. He was just done treating it with those things. And the only reason I put it that way is because that's when we started looking into herbal medicine and all kind of different things. And I don't know which ones he tried and didn't try or whatever. But he still fought the best he could. Obviously none of them worked, and cancer wound up taking him. But before it did, he wound up going into hospice, and they tried to do hospice at home, but it progressed so fast that, it wound up being safer for him being in the actual facility. Which, if you've never been to a hospice facility, those people have hearts of gold. I don't know how they can do that job day in and day out. People say that the job that me and my brothers and sisters that we all do is a tough one, and they don't know how that could be done. Working at hospice, man, that's you're working at a place where more likely than not that is those individuals' last days. You go in, you develop a friendly relationship with them, knowing ahead of time that they are going to die, and you see it time and time and time and time again. It doesn't matter how many deceased bodies I've seen, how many families I've seen grieving over the loss of a loved one. There is a part of me that feels that, but that's not my entire job. And that's what these individuals at these hospice centers do day in, day out, constantly. So those people have hearts of gold in order to be able to do that. Moving back, sorry. So Daddy, we wound up arranging for Daddy. Well, my family wound up arranging for Daddy to be in a hospice facility, and we were able to go up and visit and everything like that. But in my visits with him, you could see that it was taking more and more. I honestly believe that it progressed up into his brain just because of his loss of motor functions, his loss of speech and things of that nature. It just started affecting all of those things, which to me says that it got into his brain. And then right there at the end, I wound up taking some time off of work, and pretty much me and some family members wound up basically living in Daddy's room with him. I don't remember how long. I kind of lost track of the days, but we lived in his hospital room with him. We slept there on chairs and on the floor, and we rotated out getting showers, or going home and getting showers and coming right back, or going and getting food. And the folks at the hospice center were 100% accommodating with us. They allowed us to do that. I don't know if that's allowed everywhere, but with ours, they did. And I got to be with my daddy the moment he left. The night before he passed, he was actually having, some difficulty breathing. It was getting more and more obvious that, it was going to be any time then. And I remember the night before he passed, I pulled a chair up next to his bed. They had raised the back of the bed up. And so he was in a, pretty good upright position to help him breathe. And I sat there in a chair, just a regular chair with another chair at the end of my feet propped up. And I was holding my daddy's hand. And before I closed my eyes, we turned all the lights off and everything and left the TV on. I remember telling my daddy I loved him. And I went to sleep holding my daddy's hand. The next morning I woke up still holding my daddy's hand, but my daddy, at least in my opinion, my daddy wasn't there anymore. His body was still functioning as far as, his heart was still beating, he was still breathing. But his eyes were fixed. He wasn't blinking. So there were things there for me. And if any of my family hears this and this is hard for you, I do apologize. But to me, daddy was gone. It was his body there that was still kicking, and it was ticking down. So when daddy's body finally stopped, that was it. That was final. It was hard, and I felt it. And when the funeral home got there, fortunately, the funeral home was one of the local funeral homes from here where I live. And because of my job, I knew one of the guys that was coming there to get my dad. And he even asked me, he said, "Brian, you want to step out while we do what we got to do?" And I told him, I said, "No. I've done this, I don't know how many times for strangers and for individuals that I don't know. I'll be damned if I'm not going to do it for my own daddy." And it was nothing grotesque or horrible, but, obviously we had to get daddy onto the gurney and cover him and get him off into the hearse. And I wasn't going to miss that. I'd helped, I don't know how many people, do that with their loved ones, because of my job. There was no way I was not going to do the same thing for my own daddy, because I'm not going to do for somebody that I won't do for my own family. So I helped send my dad away, and it hurt, and I cried. And the ride home to get cleaned up and everything like that was a quiet one. It was very solemn. As a family, we'd all talked about going back to my dad's house and celebrating my dad. And that's what we did. And I can't remember if it was that night or if it was the night of his funeral, but we wound up celebrating our dad in a way that I think would have made my dad happy. It wasn't a bunch of sitting around crying and everything like that. We drank, we laughed, we ate, we shared memories, and had a really nice time just celebrating my dad. And that helped out a lot. Afterwards, going through the days and weeks after that, I'd already lost my mom and went through everything like that. So I had built up a better resiliency for having lost a loved one. So I was able to manage that better. And it was still sad. And there's moments even now, all these years later, where I'll still get choked up about it. Especially if I'm watching some TV and somebody loses a dad or something like that. There's some shows that do a really good job of making it realistic. And I'll feel the old knot in the throat and everything like that. But, I was able to manage that. And largely because of what I went through with losing mom. Mama's death was traumatic, and I learned a lot from it. And just like with mama, my family and my friends were a huge support structure for me when it came to daddy. And, because that was there, I was able to grieve and move forward with it. But there are those circumstances where, such as back with my mom, that it wasn't that easy. Just like the person that asked for this follow-up, I would imagine, having not heard the full story and not been able to ask all the questions I feel would be necessary to kind of help them, I would think that it was something along those lines, that there was a loss that caused them grief, and for one reason or another, things kept piling on them, and they weren't able to get back from that. If you're somebody that's in that particular situation, my advice for dealing with, depression from grief, deriving from grief, is not a whole lot different than with traumatic grief. The first thing is to just give yourself a break. Understand that it's okay that you're upset about whatever's caused you to grieve, whatever you've lost. It's okay. Okay, it's all right. Everyone experiences it at some point. Once you realize that, you've got to start sorting through the different things that have caused you not to move past that. Not knowing what those circumstances are in regards to this particular person, there's reasons why we aren't able to recover from grief, and that it may turn into, a clinically diagnosable depression. We've got to work through it. Obviously, in my opinion, if you believe you are, clinically depressed, then you need to talk to somebody. Obviously, I would say talk to family and friends, but in my opinion, you need an unbiased third party, somebody that's going to be able to hear what you're listening or hear what you're saying, listen to you, and then when you're ready, be able to help you start going through whatever steps need to be gone through to manage your depression. They're the ones that are going to be able, if you need medication, to help you with the medication. We do have people in this world that believe that medication is the solution for depression and for a lot of psychological disorders or issues. I am not one of those people. I believe that if you are clinically depressed, then you need to be possibly on some medication, not 100% all the time, but you possibly need to be on medication. But the biggest thing from it is you need some therapy. You need to be able to talk it out. You need to be able to talk through these events in your life that have caused you to not have the resiliency to be able to deal with it. That's not all depressive disorders. Depression is, if I'm incorrect, I do apologize, but my understanding of depression is that's a chemical imbalance in your brain. And a lot of these medications that are given you are intended to alter the chemicals in your brain to help you not feel as sad, help you not feel as depressed. But you still got to have those building blocks, those techniques and things that you do that help you continue to climb up that ladder. The medication helps you from stepping off the bottom rung, but it's the coping mechanisms and everything else that you're going to learn in therapy that's going to help you climb back up that ladder and stay up there. There may come a time where you're able to come off medications. You may be one of those individuals where you don't need medication. Just the therapy alone is what it takes. So if you think that you are clinically depressed, then my opinion is to get into some counseling. Okay. We talked about it last show. We've got to get rid of the stigma that follows this stuff. Anybody that walks around and says that, they never grieve and there's nobody that they lose in their life that causes them sadness, I find that hard to believe. Even some of the toughest men that I know, I have seen them grieve. And these are guys that they don't seem like they're affected by anything. They seem impervious, you know. And I'm only saying guys because guys are typically seen as supposed to be the tough ones. But these guys seems like nothing bothers them. They're unflappable. But I've seen them break down. You know, it's not the same thing that may break us down or break me down or someone else, but I've seen it break them down. So I find it hard to believe anybody that says, "Oh, there's nothing that affects me. I don't go through sadness and grief." Maybe you haven't yet, but chances are you're about 99.9% certain you're going to at some point in your life. You're going to lose something that means something to you. I guess the exception to the rule would be those individuals that, never form that emotional bond with somebody. Those individuals actually have a psychological diagnosis of their own, but they never are able to form that bond, an emotional bond with somebody. So maybe those individuals, but then again, it doesn't have to be a person that causes you grief. It could be the loss of a job, the loss of your favorite car, any number of things. It's just something that you form a bond with that you typically lose that causes you that grief. So the grief part of it and dealing with it, and I apologize if I'm bouncing around, but the grief part of all of it, that's something you can overcome. The depressive part of it, the depression part of it is the most concerning thing. You've got to take care of that. Now, if you're an individual that has people you trust that are willing to let you talk to them and things like that, then, go that route. Go that route first. Try it out. If it's not helping, go to a professional. Okay, go to a professional. Don't wait around and, oh, well, I was told if I change my diet here, if I start doing these things there, yeah, those things can help. But if you're doing those things and you give them a week or two and things are getting worse or they're not getting better at all, just go ahead and get some help. Okay, go ahead, seek out a professional. They're not going to go run their mouth to anybody, and you don't have to tell anybody about it. I would hope more people would want to start talking about it. More people would be willing to come out and go, no, I went and saw a therapist. I went and saw a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I wish more people would come out that have done it so we could help break through the stigma of it. But you don't have to. Go get some help. Maybe you're an individual that just simply talking it out with somebody is going to help. But if you're not, go get the help. Okay? It's not going to hurt you. I spoke with an individual not long ago who had not been doing therapy that long, and I would say maybe a month. Absolutely hated it. Absolutely hated going to therapy. Felt worse now than they did before they started going. And in discussing with this individual, it's because during therapy, some things have come out that they weren't aware of. And because of that, made them feel worse. Yeah, it's kind of the process. It's kind of what happens, going back to talking about resiliency. That's the resilient part. All the stuff that's coming up now is stuff that you never dealt with. You just kept, shoving it down the old pipe there. You kept stuffing it back in a box and locking it away. I'll deal with it later, or it'll be fine there. But everybody's box overflows. It can only hold so much. It can come out in different ways, but everybody's box can only hold so much crap. And this particular individual had just shoved so much in there that when they opened the lid that was already overflowing and started sorting through it, there's a lot more crap in there, and it was uncomfortable, and this person didn't like it, and it's understandable. And I feel for that individual. I really do, because now there's what the saying, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. There's no putting that one back. You shoved it in there once. You're not the same person you were then. So you can't shove it right back in. You can't just be like, nah. It's not like taking a blanket out of your cedar chest and, you know what? I don't want this one. Putting it back and closing the lid. It doesn't work like that. Once it comes out, it's out. And that's what's going on. And the person is uncomfortable and they don't like it. And they're, at least at the time we were speaking about it, they were feeling worse for it. And my advice to them, keep going. Keep going. Empty the contents of that box a little bit. Bring some of that stuff out. Start managing it. Start dealing with it. Start hitting those nails on the head and taking care of these things. Deal with them so that you can deal with the here and now better. Because if you can't resolve the stuff from your past, it does nothing but put chains on you for the future. And that's the same thing, at least in my opinion, when we're talking about the depression that, is derived from grief. You've got some unresolved issues that have chained you down and have prevented you from climbing back up that ladder. And you've got to deal with it. You've got to get it out. You've got to start being able to deal with it. You've got to learn the coping mechanisms and the different things that you can do to help you manage those feelings so that you can move forward. And you'll find that once you start being able to manage these things, whether it's with medication and therapy or whether it's with therapy alone, once you start managing these things, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. It's going to get easier to manage. And you're going to find out that you start enjoying your life a whole lot more. There's far too many people in this country, and I say this country because I'm here in the US, but there's far too many people in this country, and I presume the world, that are walking around hating their lives. Absolutely hating their lives, thinking they've got the worst life on the face of the planet. Some actually do, but I would venture to say the vast majority of people in, at least in our society here in the US, the vast majority of those people, they're not living horrible lives. They just have horrible feelings. And because they can't manage those emotions, they can't manage those feelings, it makes it seem like the world is just horrible. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some crappy things going on in the world right now. All you got to do is look at social media or TV or anything like that, and good Lord, it seems like the whole world's turned upside down at times. But individually, when you pull away from that stuff, individually, our lives are not that bad. I'm subject to it as well. That's why I try to really pay attention how much I allow myself to get involved in social media, other than obviously with the show and a couple other things. But for personal stuff, I really try to back away from a lot of that stuff. I even quit watching local news now. I kind of keep my ear out for it a little bit, but I even quit watching local news anymore because there's so much crap that goes through that it makes me feel like this place is crap, man. And it's really not. When I stop and pull my head out of the social media sand and look around at the place where I live and the people that I interact with, the ones I'm going to restaurants and I'm around, I'm seeing at the gas stations or at the grocery store, it's really not that bad. The picture that's being painted is not the one I actually see. And that's helpful, But it's because I've found ways to manage these emotions, these feelings. I've found ways to manage them. And that's what you've got to do as well. You've got to find a way to start dealing with whatever issues have caused you your grief, whatever issues caused you not to be able to pull up from that grief, because it's not just the grief. It's not just the grief that's holding you down. There's something else there. There's more than that there that's holding you down. Something has prevented you from having the resiliency to bounce back from grief and starting a new normal. And you've got to find a way to figure out what that issue or those issues are and start managing them. You know, if it's something that happened when you were a child and say it continues on now as an adult, if it's an individual that's doing this, maybe it's time to cut bait on that. If you can't have a conversation or conversations with this individual and, you know, start resolving some of this, maybe it's time to cut bait. You know, maybe you don't need that person in your life if they're the ones causing you to feel this way. You know, maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe it's just you seeing things wrong, or seeing it, I say wrong, you're seeing it through your own lens, but you can't see it from the other side. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe the way you viewed life up to this point was through a lens that was partially covered. You know, but you're not going to know these things until you start looking, until you start digging, you start doing the work to find out what it is that's preventing you to be able to get past this. And if you can't figure it out on your own, that's when you reach out. You know, the particular individual that was requesting this particular topic, me and that individual are going to have a conversation, and I'm going to ask those questions. I want to know, you know, I want to help them figure out where this started. Where did all this start? You know, did it start with the grief and everything pile on top of it? Or was it a bunch of crap before that and then grief and then a bunch of crap after that? I don't know. I'm not going to know until we have the conversation, but they were brave enough to reach out to somebody. Just happened to be me, but they were brave enough to reach out to somebody and try to start working through it. You know, I was told by this person that they have been through therapy before. Good. When I found that out, my response back was, good, keep going. Go back. Whatever the situation is, get back at it. You know, by all means, I'm willing to have however many conversations it takes to help somebody get through whatever they're going through. But it comes a point when it's out of my league. Hopefully I can help you get to that point before then, but if not, you know, reach out. Reach out to somebody, plenty of them that are smarter than me. You know, I'm not just saying that for this particular individual, but anyone. You know, I've said it plenty of time on the other episodes. I'm willing to help anybody. You know, whether it's, you know, doing one of these shows, whether it's, you know, an email conversation, a phone call, a Zoom call, whatever it takes to try to help, I'm willing to help out. You know, because you're trying. That's what you got to do. You got to try. And I don't mean, oh, well, I did it for a week or two and, oh, you know, it's not helping. No, no, that's not how any of this is going to work. This isn't a cold that you can take some, you know, some sinus meds for and help get past. This isn't a pulled muscle that you can rest for a little bit, take some anti-inflammatories and ice it up and it's going to get better. That's not how this works. The reason you're at a position that you are now, if you're in that position, is because there is a whole lot more than just one thing piled on there. And it's going to take some time, and you've got to be patient. Give yourself a break, feel your emotions, and be patient with it. Do the work. That's the hardest part, and that's one of the biggest gripes I have with a lot of people in this world, is they're not willing to do the work. They come up with 1,000,001 different excuses. Oh, it's not working. Oh, I don't like that person. Oh, da-da-da. 1,000,001 excuses to quit doing the work. Well, I quit going because I wasn't feeling any better. Well, then find somebody else. Find somebody else to try to help you. You can go on Google. You can go on any internet search platform. If you still use a phone book, you can go through a phone book. You can talk to a doctor. You can get a list of therapists, behavioral therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, They're out there. There is a plethora. No one has an excuse to not seek help. The average person has no excuse not to try. You're just coming up with reasons. Oh, well, I got to work. You know what? I have to work too. I got to work too. But I find time for the things that I want. I used to be over 300 pounds. I wanted to lose weight, but my work schedule made working out difficult. But I heard something and it stuck with me. You make time for the things that are important. You make time for the things that are important. And at the time that I was having to hold my breath because it hurt to breathe when I tried to tie my boots, that was important to me. That was important to me for me to lose that weight. When I went into the doctor's office and they told me they weren't letting me leave until they did an EKG on me to make sure I wasn't having a heart attack, that was important to me. I made time to start doing the things I needed to do to lose the weight, to get me healthy, to make it so that I was more comfortable with myself. No different for this. You have no excuses. You can give me all the reasons in the world, but you've got no excuses not to go out and get some help. Even though, oh, well, if my job finds out, well, then damn your job. Well, I need it. Guess what? You were looking for a job when you got that one. Because you can't do your job if you're dead. You can't do your job if you're stuck sitting at the house, not being able to get off the couch or get out of bed. So what excuse do you got? None. Well, I don't have a ride. Call one. Every excuse you're going to try to give, every reason you're going to try to give, there's a solution for. If it's important to you. If it's important. If it's important, you have no excuses. You have opportunities to overcome obstacles so that you can go achieve what you want to achieve, but you have no excuses to do it. You want to get better, then get better. That's all there is. You have to want it. You know, I've said it to plenty of people in dealing with individuals, and this comes more from personal experience than anything. Individuals who are addicts, whether it's alcohol or whatever substance, those individuals can go to, I don't care how many rehabs. I don't care what you as an individual do to help them. Until that person is ready to do it, they're never going to change. You know, we deal with it all the time. And this isn't anything negative on anyone that does do it. But here we have what's called a 1013. It's an involuntary committal order where family members can go to the courthouse, profess that a loved one of theirs needs mental health help, signs an affidavit, gives their evidence. The judge sees the evidence, makes a determination on whether or not this person needs to go. And then if they do, signs off on this mental health order. And then law enforcement has to go pick this person up and transport them to a mental health facility. You can do that 100 times for an individual. But until that individual is ready to change, it's not going to work. And we're talking about substance abuse, addicts. Until that person is ready to make that change, you can 1013 them 100 times and it's not going to do any good. You say, oh, they're going to hit rock bottom. You have no clue where rock bottom for that person is. None. The place where you think might be rock bottom, guess what? Maybe it is, maybe it ain't. Chances are it ain't. Rock bottom's a lot further down than you think it is. So help them, try. Maybe along the way they'll make the decision, but they got to want it. If you're somebody that's going through depression or grief, you're in that same boat right now. You got to want it. You got to want to get up off your knees and start walking again. You got to want to start climbing that ladder again. You got to want to start enjoying your life. If you're clinically depressed, that's a hard task for you right now. It's a real hard task for you right now. But there's going to come a point where you're tired of hurting. There's going to come a point where you're tired of feeling sad. And it's kind of the same thing of when you got that little feeling in your stomach right before you bungee jumped for the first time, or did something where you were scared to do it, but you had that brief moment of courage, that brief moment of, no, let's do it. And if you don't act right, that very minuscule second, it's gone. That moment has to happen for you, and you need to jump when it does. When that moment happens and you decide, I don't want to feel like this anymore, I want to get better, then do it. Get up and do it. Pick up the phone, make a phone call, go to a friend's house, go to the doctor's office, do what you got to do. But when that moment hits, you have to act on it, or else you might not get back up. The moment may pass and you may not experience it again. You have to want it. And like I said, if you're clinically depressed, that's going to be tough to do right now, but it's possible. It is possible. Even if it's just going on a whim to see if it helps. You go to the right person, you go to the right therapist, you go to the right psychologist or psychiatrist, you go to the right one, they're going to help you get there. You just got to be willing to try. Remember, you've got no excuse. None. Even if you're clinically depressed, it is no excuse to not try. It's going to be tough. You're going to have to fight. You're going to have to work for it. But there's nothing worth having in this world that comes easy. So if you want to feel better, you want to get better, you want to start enjoying your life, get up and put the work in. Do the hard part. I think you can do it. I've seen plenty of people try. I've seen people fail. I've seen people succeed. I want to see you succeed too. I want to know that you're a success story. I think you can do it. So on that note, guys, I don't know what else to say about it, but that's what I got. Hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too much, though I think in this one I probably did. I think I jumped around a little too much, but y'all will be the judges on this one. At any rate, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the consideration. As always, feel free to reach out, whether it's an email, a text, phone call, however you guys want to reach out, a comment in one of the videos, whether it's on YouTube, TikTok, it doesn't matter, reach out and let me know. I'm always willing to help, even if it's just trying to find the right resource for you or get you in the right direction. I'm willing to help. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. And as always, I will catch you on the next one. Okay? Be safe, guys. Later.